session number 2 of Friday at Words and Music. This is creating compelling characters. I'll do a quick introduction of everyone. Before we do that though, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up about the 2 QR codes you'll see. One is to donate to support the festival and our year-round work uplifting literacy here in New Orleans. And the other is a digital version of the festival program for those of you who prefer to have it on your phone rather than as a book in your hand. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce these beautiful people up here. This session is moderated by Bernice McFadden. She is the author of many books, including Sugar, a Book of Harlan, and a forthcoming novel about being a first daughter. Is that right? Memoir about being a first daughter. So look for that. Coming up, next we have Brian Egland. What we've done here is we've got 3 different genres of writers talking about how they create characters. Brian is up here as our playwright. He is currently one of the fellows of the National Black Theater in Harlem, and his play will be produced at the We Will Dream Festival by No Dream Deferred, which is happening in March 2023. Is that correct? Excellent. Next we have Mark Neely, a poet. Poets create characters too. It's not just fiction writers and playwrights. And Mark's most recent collection of book Ticker has a character named Bruce, who's the main character you follow throughout this journey, which speaks to my love of Springsteen. So thank you for that, Mark. And then last but not least, we have Carleton Eastlake, who has published his first novel, Monkey Business, after several years creating characters as a writer for television. So, welcome to all of the panelists. Thank you so much, and I'll let Bernice take it away.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being here. It's not often that I get to be at a table filled with men. So, I like that. All right, we're just going to jump right in. So for me, the characters are the heartbeat of every story. Some writers tend to begin with a concept, then build out the story, and the characters come from there. When creating your stories, do you start with character or concept? Anyone?
Well, I start with, for novels, not for television or film, I start with a personal issue that I want to work on. A personal issue that I've encountered in my life that I think narcissistically is an issue that people ought to my own troubles, and that I want to work through and actually do want to preach to an audience about what I've learned from it. But then that does lead to characters that have to embody the issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have sort of a different story because I'm a poet. So normally I start with things like language or imagery or like just this fragment of language. But for this book, I decided to have this central character named Bruce, and part of the reason I did that is so I could say things in Bruce's voice that maybe I wouldn't be comfortable saying in my own voice, or that it just gave me a freedom to explore difficult subjects, difficult emotions that I might have felt squeamish about writing in first person. I mean, some of these poems are in first person, but they're in Bruce's voice. So that gave me a lot of freedom, and that was a really amazing experience to me. And I mean, people don't think about characters in poetry as much as in a play, say, or in a novel. But obviously, character is always there. The voice of the speaker of any poem is like the most important thing in the poem, typically. So that's kind of the way I think about it.
So, but did Bruce come to you first?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back. I think, well, see, I have just written kind of a very first-person, personal sort of book, and I wanted to do something different. Mm-hmm. And I sort of had this idea. I can't remember exactly how he came about, but It just sort of like slowly formed in the poems I was writing and took over like the I that was writing the other poems. So yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, my honest answer is that I don't know what comes first. And it's interesting when we say character because that, at least from my perspective, that can mean a few different things. We of course have the characters that take human or animal form, but it's also like the character that is invisible in the story. That could be the world, and that's usually what comes first in my stories, is developing the character that the character that will always be there, that doesn't speak, and I go from there. And that also could be like a spiritual thing as well, because I tend to write from a spiritual place.
I do as well. Well then, so that, I had a question that kind of links to what you just said. It was at the bottom of my list,
Okay.
but I'll pose it now. Locations have a lot to say. What are your thoughts about place as a character, and have you actively tackled that concept in your work? So you've answered.
Yes.
Partly, but I mean, is it something that, is it something that you just sit down and say, okay, I'm writing about New York, and New York is going to be a character, or does New York just develop into being a character?
Okay, well, you know, because my work, I'm a playwright, so my work is visual. I have to think of the whole picture. So where everything is happening is part of what starts first for me. And then I put people or things into the space. So the play that was mentioned that will be produced in the spring of next year is called Where the Sugar's Still Sweet. And I was commissioned to write a Southern play. And though I've been Southern my entire life, I didn't know what to do. I was like, a Southern play? What is that? And I had to really think about, like, what is Southern to you, Brian? And in New Orleans, but I grew up in a small town, if you know of it, Broke Ridge, Louisiana. And I grew up my next door neighbors was sugarcane. That's what I grew up next to. I didn't know people.
Right.
And the actual premise of the play is about sugarcane. And the story is about a boy who was killed and buried in a sugarcane field. And the sugarcane now that grows up is dead. It grows up dead.
Yeah.
His best friend can find him, his spirit, because where he's buried is the only place in the dead field where the sugar is still sweet. It grows up, and it grows up right.
Right.
Yeah.
Ooh, thank you. So what say you, Carlton?
Well, it's
about-
interesting, yeah, it's an interesting question which I hadn't thought about before. Even though I saw my wife once at Words of Music do an entire panel on place as a character, which was a hysterical event because everybody was hungover on the panel. And we're a little shocked that they were suddenly there. Yes, but now that you ask, yes, almost all the work I do does have a soundtrack. Almost sort of externalizing my mind. Almost everything that I've done, and certainly this first novel and the novel following it, the place is intensely important. And there actually tends to be, now you ask, there tends to be, things tend to take place in a structure, like a building or a ship, and you could apply a character analysis to it, and you could really, put it on the couch and do a Freudian analysis of what the different levels, literally the physical levels, are actually representing in human consciousness and all that. So absolutely, and I had not thought of it. So that was a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that because I thought a lot about that. I think a lot about that as a teacher of poetry. I'm always telling my students, like, setting detail, it's so important. If you have a poem where someone's just like floating around in a white, empty space, it just doesn't have texture. It's not believable. The character doesn't come to life. So when I was writing this, I thought a lot about like mundane spaces, like the grocery store, places we go like all the time, but we kind of block out almost. And I mean, how important is the grocery store? How much political was down there, how much, you know, food supply, food chain, and we're like even more aware of this now. And so I thought a lot about setting and putting Bruce in like these mundane spaces, the office, the grocery store, the park with his dog, you know, and thinking about how often we block out like the regular places we go every day and sort of forget about them and they disappear. I love this sugarcane idea, by the way. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. I want to talk about inspirations. To know, like I have characters that I've read in the works of people that I admire or despise, and but they haunt me, right? Because the characters were so well written that they jumped off the page and they stayed with me. Do you all have any characters that haunt you? Or even, or any characters that you wish you would have written?
And out of the body of literature and theater.
Yeah, any
Yeah.
genre.
Well, yeah, I do, and I keep writing them. I started writing actually in 6th grade, but the really great impulse to become a writer came in my senior year of high school, though I'd already taken creative writing twice. The school waved me into it, so obviously I was writing, but I suddenly had this deep passion at the end of Farewell to Arms. Our school textbook oddly only had like the last 2 pages, you know, where Catherine dies and he walks off into the rain, the doctor offers him a ride and he turns it down. Just reading that 2 pages devastated me. And so I developed the desire to rewrite it so Catherine would live. And then I went on reading Hemingway, so then I wanted Jordan, or whatever it is, to survive his battle with the fascists and For Whom the Bell Tolls, and wanted to rewrite that ending so that he survived and went off and found love. So those characters certainly haunted me. And then Anna Karenina, I write very often about very challenging and disturbing women, and this very challenging, disturbing woman that I was in love with gave me Anna Karenina and told me it was her favorite novel, which was a warning. And so that certainly haunted me. And I wrote this in response initially to Steppenwolf and the Magus, because this is a magic theater story. You know, Amazon says it's literary satire, and also lists it in fantasy erotica, which is a real interesting combination of categorization. But so the Steppenwolf and also the Magus, the magician who created the magic theater in the Magus, you know, conscious, certainly haunted me and motivated me to write a response to what I thought were flawed answers to the meaning of life in those 2 books.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you asked that question, I thought of a different way of going about it. One thing that really haunted me in the writing of this book were events. So events of my lifetime, and always involving people. Personal events like the death of my father. The first poem in the book is about the Challenger disaster, which was, you know, I saw on television in my school when I was in whatever grade that was, and that was kind of the first public tragedy that I experienced. And it had to do with the fact that there was a school teacher, like an ordinary person on board. And it was also just like this public grieving thing that was happening, which was new to me as a child, you know, and that was, there's also like poems in here about the Vietnam War, which I was not, you know, I was born like at the end of the Vietnam War, but the reverberations of that haunted people that I know, people throughout, you know, in history, and so those are some things that, it was the events that haunted me, and then the characters like sprung up out of those things.
What year was that? The Challenger?
87?
86 January.
Oh,
Okay,
right.
86, yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. Thank you.
I concur with that. I was actually going to say that. And then I also think I'm honing myself. I think that's what's going on. The second play that I directed, at the end of it, one of my lead actress told me that the show had 4 characters in it. And she said, all of these characters are a different part of your personality. And I didn't realize it until then, because I know who I am, and there's so many things I guess I suppress that comes out through a character and a situation. So maybe I'm haunting myself, and my writing and the plays and the situations is my way trying to exercise these things so I can grow and heal.
That's interesting. How many of you believe that writing is therapy?
Well, it also is categorized as literary fiction, psychological fiction, and it explicitly addresses evolutionary psychology. That's why it's monkey business. I regard it as I said, I've really been work on issues of my own, but absolutely I regard it as therapy. And I think most literature that lives long enough to get into the canon addresses very deep psychological themes. And the more I've studied evolutionary psychology on the one side and neuropsychology, and on the other side, psychoanalytic and psychodynamic psychology, which sort of come at it from the metaphorical side and the slowly building physical, verifiable side. And so far, the tunnels do seem to be meeting eventually. I think that, as you probably are implying with your question, that most literature, most theater really is therapeutic on a certain level for the characters, for the audience, and for the creator.
Yeah, I think reading is very therapeutic, and I think reading is so important for many reasons, especially reading novels and plays and poetry, because it helps us create empathy and develop empathy and understand the lives of people who aren't like us. It's a difficult question whether writing is therapy to me, especially as a poet. I mean, poets don't have a great track record of like being mentally healthy. And I mean, they have like literally a much higher risk of suicide. And so it's a difficult question, but you know, maybe that's why people turn to poetry, because they're in trouble. For me, I know that when I'm writing, I feel a lot better than when I'm not writing. So that's my personal thing. It's just the practice of doing it is very helpful for my mental health. So yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think reading is absolutely, you know, it enriches your life in quite an amazing way.
If writing is therapy, for me, when I'm writing, it doesn't look like it. There's usually a lot of crying that may happen, and because I'm a playwright and it's for acting, and I studied acting, I'm usually acting out all the roles in my room. So if anyone was to walk in on me writing, they would say, you need therapy. As opposed to, this is therapy.
But, you know, Steven Pinker in The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he started as a psychologist, made the really interesting observation about literature. You know, Better Angels of Our Nature is about 10 pounds documenting how Western civilization particularly has become, though it's hard to believe, but statistically, even putting in World War II in Ukraine, how the per capita deaths by murder, war, and just human dominance over other humans has actually declined. And how, as we know, and you're hearing in the news about Ukraine, how active war crimes, investigations, and pressure, even now from the General Assembly of the United States, is pressuring Russia to follow very narrow channels. And so having documented this long decline, and I did my thesis actually on homicide rates and non-literate cultures, how this long progress in humankind came about, Pinker could not come up with an explanation other than the novel. The only specific example he gave is he was floundering around for an explanation, and he thought the printing press and so had helped spread humanist ideas. But he finally came down to how the novel had generated empathy for others and cited an anecdote from someone's diary or memoir, some sort of Colonel Blimp character who read Richardson or Trollope, somebody writing very movingly about a woman and had commented, my God, you know, who knew these creatures had such emotions? And so Pinker, you know, Harvard psychologist documenting the history of civilization, feels that the novel helped do very profound therapy for all of Western civilization. You can make that argument certainly for American history.
Yeah.
You can make that argument leading up to the Civil War, how the novel, you know, Uncle Tom's Cabin helped in the nonfiction, you know, abolitionist press, but also works in particularly Uncle Tom's Cabin created this great revulsion in the North that changed American civilization. So it's therapeutic.
Thank you. Characters' names. Characters' names offer the first clue to who she, he, they are, not only for the author, but also for the audience. And names have meaning, carries weight. I'm curious as to where you mine the names for your characters, or do the characters, in fact, name themselves?
They name themselves. They name themselves. But I also do, as a playwright, have a mission that I am on now. My playwriting is focused on the African American experience. And I also have taught within the school systems here. And I had these two students with beautiful names. Their names were, and are, Sayori and Inyasha. And when they told me their names, the sounds of them, it took me a while to process the sound, and also took me a while to remember how to say it. So now in my plays, whether it makes sense or not, I include a name rooted in African culture, because I want to normalize those names for myself and for anyone who reads my plays or sees my plays, because for my culture, those are our original names that we don't know anymore. We don't recognize their sounds. Yeah. So I might write a play where there will be a T-boy, and I don't have a play with a T-boy, but just saying there will be a T-boy or a Zadiko, but there will also be a Nkwadi or an Nkaruka, just to have it there. Yeah. That's my mission.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what the experts in this kind of character building think about names. This character's name had an interesting origin, because my father's name was Frank Wright Neely, and he was from Texas, and then for some reason everyone in that family in Texas calls everyone by their middle name. So he went his whole life as Wright. Wright Neely, no one ever called him Frank, no one ever even knew his name was Frank, except for like family, close family. And so this character's name was Frank, because it was still a way to honor him and a way to, it's his secret name. And it was like a little secret between me and my, deceased father. And a really fabulous poet named C.A. Conrad came out with a book called The Book of Frank as I was working on this. And I was like, well, that won't do. I'm going to change his name. So I changed it to Bruce, because Bruce is kind of from the same era. It's a little bit old-fashioned, and this Bruce is a little bit flummoxed by the 21st century and a little bit old-fashioned in his curmudgeon. And so I wanted a bit of an old-fashioned name that was in the same era as Frank, and that's how that came about.
Well, that's a really, really interesting question, because in this book is about a writer on location with a TV show, which I had done in Orlando. And he meets a dancer in a strip club who says that she is searching for rational life on Earth. And he later says, you know, she is searching for intelligent life. And she corrects him that humans are intelligent, but it's very doubtful they're rational. However, and he's madly in love with her, and he would like to know her name, but, and he thinks he knows her name. Then he discovers that the names he keeps learning are the names of her wigs that she dances in. Because, and this is one way she protects her agency, of course, because she says, you know, the customers keep blabbing away at my wig, thinking they're talking to me. The names of her wigs, however, came out of Western mythology. So a classicist opening, by the end of the book, I think everyone knows, but a classicist reading her first choice of a couple of names will go, these men are in for a lot of trouble. These are all the names of avenging goddesses who protect young women. So the names are very important. His name came out psychologically, and I only discovered, you know, it was so obvious. His name is William, and so I named him. People often call him Liam, but another nickname they use for him is Will. And of course, it is about will. It is about consciousness. But that was not a conscious choice, of course, because humans aren't rational, including me. I work a lot on names and get very frustrated. Sometimes I give up and pick a name that this sounds somewhat evocatively suitable for the character. And someday I'll probably discover it did have a secret meaning for me. But very often I research the meaning of the names and hope that it has a subtextual influence on how people perceive the character.
Thank you. Now, I suspect there may be 1, 2, or 4 aspiring writers in the audience. And I'm always interested in when a writer first knew he, she, or they were actually a writer. When was that moment in your lives when you said, this is what I am? When you named yourself?
I didn't name it.
No.
I was in the 5th grade, and I always, Miss Charlotte, who got remarried, is now Mrs. Austin back. It's hard to call her Mrs. Austin because I had her when she was Miss Charlotte. But she gave us an assignment to write, and she put 3 paintings on the board, and our assignment was to write a page about it. And one painting was of a bowl of fruit. I can't remember what the other one was. And then the last painting was of these shadowy black people outside of a church. And everyone wrote about that bowl of fruit. And I wrote about the shadowy people. Mm-hmm. And she was amazed by it. And she made me rewrite that essay, I kid you not, at least 20 times by hand, because she was so proud and she wanted it to be perfect. So if I didn't get the cursive right, or if I didn't this, that, or third, she would rewrite it because she was so proud. Mm-hmm. And I always credit that experience, because if I had not had to rewrite it that many times, that was writing.
Right.
It wasn't me writing it, but it was me being instilled to write.
Right.
Because writing is a dedication. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of time. So yes, it is the creative process of, or the act of doing it, but it's doing it over and over and over again, because no writer writes one book or one poem.
Writing is in the rewriting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was grade?
The 5th grade.
5th grade.
5th grade.
Nice. Yeah, you learned very quickly that writing is revision, something that took me a very long time to learn. So, good teacher. Mm. I have kind of a similar story, which I remember well, the first poem I ever wrote. And it was, I believe it was like middle school, maybe freshman year of high school. And we had read The Great Gatsby. And our teacher gave us 2 choices. We could write an essay on The Great Gatsby, like a critical paper, or we could write a creative response. So a short story, a poem, poem's a lot shorter than an essay. I was a lazy child, and so I was like, well, I'm writing the poem. I mean, that's just so much easier. But it turned out that I just really enjoyed it. The teacher, you know, responded well to it. I think I showed it to my mom, you know, like, and so that I got a little bit of positive feedback for it. But mostly it was that just was like, this is pretty cool, you know, like this style of writing is pretty cool. It took a long time after that where I would like call myself a poet because that sounded pretentious and weird, and you know, and I thought, but I was always like writing poems secretly, you know. And then I had a wonderful teacher, Bridget Kelly, Bridget Pekin Kelly is one of the best poets of the last 50 years, I think, and she kind of guided me as an undergrad, and I was like dumb and like didn't know anything, but I thought I knew everything. And she was brilliant and did know everything, and so, but she just treated me like an equal.
Yeah.
And that was huge.
I think that's very important in the classroom.
Yeah.
That we're not there as professors, as the master, right? Because there's a lot of stuff I don't know, and there's a lot of stuff my students know, and together we make it work, right? That's
Definitely.
wonderful. That's a wonderful memory. Thank you.
It was also, for me, teachers. I mean, as I said, I think I wrote my first story in 6th grade, and I remember in 8th grade writing a story and the teacher having me show it to my therapist. So that was a start. A speech therapist. I had a Brooklyn accent, and you hear it in New Orleans too, because it's a coastal immigrant accent. But here I was in California. But anyway, so the school used that as an excuse to get me a therapist that worked on my speech, but also mothered me for an hour. That happened all along, but the two pivotal times was my freshman year of high school. I wrote a book report. I've written about this. I mean, it could possibly be the upward year. And my English teacher, Mr. Crawford, took me aside, actually took me out to the courtyard in front of the classroom and said, well, this is a book report. You're a writer. You recreated the novel here. There's somebody you have to meet. And he told the class to read the next chapter and led me clear across campus to the creative writing teacher and introduced me to her. And she said, you got to take my class next year. So sophomore year, I took her class. And then the high school waived the, only one class, iteration, let me repeat the class senior year. And so it was doing that they were telling me I was a writer. And then, as I said, sort of a pivotal moment came when I said, I really am a writer because I want to improve on Hemingway and make it come out my way. So, but the school really did it.
Yeah.
Really did it. And then I might add, for people who are aspiring writers, UCLA did all they could to discourage me. They wouldn't let me into the undergraduate creative writing program because I wasn't good enough. And a delicious revenge is I then later taught in the graduate school at UCLA, taught writing. So the undergraduate, lecturer, he had written a short story and published it in Playboy, so he was a very important, expert on the short story. And literally, he had, and I did end up teaching at graduate screenwriting at UCLA, so much for him. But they really did slow me down for 10 years. Bad teachers slowed me down for 10 years.
I had a similar experience.
Yeah. In university?
Yes. So the very first play that I wrote, they did not want to put it on. And I can tell you why. I don't know if it was because, but they said, I would have to direct the play. And they said I wasn't qualified to direct the play because I didn't take a directing class. But they weren't offering the directing class before I graduated. So I said, well, why not direct the play then? That'll be my directing class.
Right.
And I made a PowerPoint of all the reasons why I should do my play, and it happened.
It happened. I don't know how much more time we have, but are any of you interested in reading a really short excerpt? to give the audience a taste of your work?
Sure.
Yes, please. Thank you. Whoever would like, yes?
Okay, I mentioned the Challenger, so I'll read the first poem in the book, which is, some of the poems are spoken in Bruce's voice. This is one of them, and some of them are like spoken in a narrator's voice about Bruce, but this is in his voice. And if you're around my age, you'll recognize a lot of this stuff at the beginning of the poem. If not, just roll with it. This is subvocal Challenger. Age of Achille Lauro and Rainbow Warrior, of Mad Max and the Doddering Gipper, of plaid-clad women and mustachioed men tossing villains through plate glass, of Jan Hammer desperately seeking Susan, easy lover, of Gorbachev with his skull cracked open, age of sweetness and the refrigerator, age of I love it when a plan comes together, and the jittery schoolroom television where I watched the launch become a strange white praying mantis in the sky, obviously a major malfunction. It was happiness, taunting the three-fingered girl who moused along the playground fence. It was life, when her brothers, thick-tongued and rough as the broken sidewalk, came hulking from an alley to kick my skinny ribs in. The bruising was an unexpected pleasure. I must have dreamed the rocket boosters corkscrewing away. Who could have known, days later, I'd be smoking Winston's in an abandoned mansion as girls stepped through the windows in Brooke Shields jeans, dust floating in the sunlight like our nebulous desires. Who could have imagined all the stupid years to come? The wreckage falling toward the ocean, the surface of the suffocating dark.
I have such respect for poets. What you do on the page in like the short amount of space is phenomenal to me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next.
My envy goes the other way. I'm always envious of playwrights and novelists, so I'm like, how do you all do this stuff?
Carlton.
Okay, sadly, prose takes longer. I did not prepare to, I'll try and end this at some point. This is the introduction. I'll try to end it before even the introduction ends. Even the hint of a smile would likely have made a regrettable first impression. Smoke as white as when they elect a new pope was still puffing from the ruins. Oranges on the nearest trees in the encircling grove had boiled on the branch. 40 firefighters and sheriff deputies had responded to the blaze. When their attention wasn't drawn to a new burst of embers spiraling into the night sky from the strike of a fireman's hook, their looks were mostly directed at me. All the same, it was hard to keep a straight face. Just hours earlier, the sign topping the building had colored the raindrops on my car's windshield purple and pink from a mile away. Now the club's tallest feature was a gilded stripper's pole, rising inexplicably, or had Nicole planned this part too, but aptly erect from the ashes. Although that was not the biggest reason I was fighting not to break into laughter, nor was it the arson investigators' questions. Objectively, they were perfectly reasonable. Had I any idea how, why the fire started? Yes, but I didn't want to share my theories because you will place me under a psychiatric hold. Where had I been at the time I first suspected a blaze was consuming the club with me inside, in a place nearly everyone told me didn't exist? And I had to clench my abdominals tight to hold it all together at this question: what exactly had I been doing in the time leading up to the fire, minute by minute? Do you really mean exactly, including specific body parts and such, or would choice euphemisms do? No, the greatest problem was his tie. They're giant penises, Nicole had explained to me, rising from a man's belt line and a tapering shaft to a swelling glans. Expertly tied, they even have a dimple to represent a urethra. I believe I replied, huh? Of course, they're also an advertisement. That's why they're an arrow pointing down toward the real penis. And a warning, the sharp point, the colors bright as coral snakes. If you want proof, look at that bowling idiot on TV. His indecently long, bright red ties. He's trying both to protect and hide his sad little member while creating the impression it's huge. So I could go on, but anyway, that gives you a taste.
You know, the first few sentences actually read like poetry.
Well,
Right? It was very lyrical.
Thank you. I work, I do many drafts just for language, just for language.
Thank you so much.
I took that inspiration from Shirley Hazard, who, although publishing at novel length, and they were novels, reads like poetry when you pay attention. Thank you.
Brian?
Okay. Bet I'm gonna try to do a scene for y'all just by myself. This is
You said you act out all the roles. So this is your chance.
This is from a play that I wrote called The Island at the End of the World, which is a play about, the scene is not, but the play is about Gullah culture, or it's not about Gullah culture, it takes place on a Gullah island. And in this scene is between Shayna and her father, Ron, and she's finding out that Shayna has just kissed the boy, and Ron is not very happy with that. Okay. Shayna runs up the yard, but the car has passed. Shayna sits at the end of the lawn. Ron joins her. Shayna. He kissed me. Greg kissed me, and it felt like I could breathe again. And I kissed him, and it felt like I could see him, see past the mask. And I don't know what there was there, but weren't no devil. Then he just leave. He gone. Like Corey, like Mama. Why'd they just leave me? What's wrong with me? Ron. There's something wrong with you, Shayna. There's gotta be something wrong with me. What other reason is there? There's gotta be something wrong with me. A farmer planted a field of peas, and one of them was sweeter than sweet could ever be. Well, it must be my duty to protect this seed. Has to be the reason why God gave me the sweetest pea. So he cut the grass to get rid of the snakes and built a fence to keep the rabbits away. And yes, the farmer did indeed protect God's sweetest pea. I've always loved that story, Daddy. Ron continues the story. It is something Shayna is unfamiliar with. When the farmer died, God said, "Come to me. You did everything right except with that pea. But I protected the pea with all my life. I kept it safe. I put up a fight." God said, "Well, show me the pea." And in the farmer's hands was a withered pea, no longer sweet. God said it was only a pea. That's what it was meant to be. But now all it is in your hands. You are the sweetest pea that there ever was, sweet pea. And I've held you in my hands to protect you from what I thought was rabbits and snakes. No, what I know were rabbits and snakes. But I think, like that pea, you're withering. And I have to let you be what you're supposed to be. Even though I want to protect you, I can't. That's for God to do.
Read my watch off my list. Oh my God. Thank you for those beautiful readings. I think I have one last question left. What do you hope your legacy will be?
Well, I mean, okay. I've always thought of myself as a natural prop writer. When I was doing television, I would do very subversive episodes of what seemed to be ordinary television. No, I want to persuade people. I want to change how people perceive the world. Very late in this novel, Nicole tells Liam, who was questioning the value, particularly of writing television, that if he doesn't create fiction that lets people process reality, learn from reality, but in a way that is safer than experiencing the worst of it themselves, but still develops their understanding and empathy, then other people will write horrible things that will instead convince them with their, fascist fantasies or whatever. So, no, my legacy is I do want to help other people who are like me but younger, jump a few steps in the way by learning about the world through this. And I want to persuade people, and particularly want to persuade people to perceive how irrational the world is, even for humans, who are the most intelligent of great apes, but still really aren't. And really, as Pinker says, try and advance civilization and make it more what we think of as human.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think about my legacy much as a writer. I think about it more as a teacher. And we had those moments that we talked about, and moments where a teacher either did great harm or, so I think very carefully, because I remember maybe, a sentence that a teacher spoke to me at a certain point that meant so much, and probably they weren't thinking very much about what they were saying at all, or a comment someone wrote on something I wrote. So I really think about, how I can help young people, or, any age people, but my students become confident in themselves, feel the joy of making art, feel the vast importance of making art. And that's where I feel like I'm doing really good work. I like to write poems, and I like to read poems, and I that's something I do as a practice, but teaching is where I think I'm probably making the biggest difference. So that's where I think of legacy, I think.
Beautiful, thank you.
Theater saved my life. Not just the writing of it, but the art of it. And there are so many people, especially those that are coming up, our younger generation, especially the younger generation of youth that have black and brown skin, that have no place to allow themselves to bear how they feel. So it comes into the world in so many different ways. Whether they hurt themselves or they hurt others, whether they actually do yell or it's always inside. And I know it may just be a reach, but I hope to write plays and also be a playwright to give opportunity for a place for them to express their emotions. And to be someone and to say, if he's doing this, maybe there's a place, maybe I could go into the theater. I want to invite them into the theater. And I hope that my legacy is that there are people who would not be in a theater, that would not be in the play, or even write a play, writing it, acting it, or just sitting in the seats and having an experience that is not them wishing for more.
Thank you, gentlemen. What a lovely morning.